They say there is a place deep in the heart of the Amazon where the river itself is alive, where the water boils without fire, and the steam carries voices older than the first human breath. No map will take you there, and no guide will promise your return. It is a place whispered about by shamans, feared by hunters, and hidden from the eyes of the world. Those who find it speak of heat that seeps into your bones, of shadows moving beneath the surface, and of something watching, waiting. This is not just a river. It is a boundary between the living and the lost, between truth and a legend too dangerous to tell. Tonight, I will cross that boundary with you. And once you hear what waits on the other side, you may wish you never had. They say the Amazon hides more secrets than any library in the world, that its rivers are veins of a living body older than human memory. But I have always believed that sometimes the river remembers you back. I was in Cusco when the story began, though I didn't know it yet. My name is Claire Alden, 32, lecturer in historical cartography at Oxford, student of forgotten lines on yellowed parchment. My life had been spent tracing coastlines no ship had followed for centuries, rivers long since dried into dust, and cities marked only with an X and a word in Latin, deserta. It was a comfortable, academic pursuit, a way to live in the past without risking too much of the present. But in the winter of that year, an aging archivist named Father Ignacio sent a letter to my department. He claimed he had found something unusual in the sealed vault of a monastery deep in the Peruvian highlands. His handwriting trembled across the page, but the words were deliberate. It should not exist, and yet it does. Come quickly. I was halfway through my tea when I read it. Something in that phrasing, not I have found something rare or valuable, but should not exist, lodged in my mind like a thorn. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the cloister of Santa Rosa de la Selva, high stone walls sweating with the cold mist of the Andes, listening to the rain hiss on old terracotta tiles. Father Ignacio was a small man in a weathered brown robe, with the eyes of someone who had seen too much to be entirely comfortable with it. He didn't greet me with pleasantries, only with a nod that said, "Follow me." He led me down a flight of narrow steps into the monastery's belly, where the air smelled of cedar and parchment, and the only sound was the shuffling of his sandals. We stopped before a heavy oak door bound in black iron. He produced a key the size of my hand, turned it with a groan of metal, and the vault yawned open. Inside, rows of shelves leaned under the weight of centuries, manuscripts wrapped in oilskin, maps rolled into cracked leather tubes, ledgers whose ink had long since faded into ghosts. He guided me to a low table where a single bundle lay wrapped in cloth the color of dried blood. With almost ritual care, he unfolded it, layer by layer, until a brittle, half-charred sheet of parchment emerged. The edges were burned to lace, the surface mottled with the scars of heat, as if it had been rescued from a fire at the last possible moment. Even before I saw the words, I felt the hair rise on my arms. The drawing was crude but unmistakable, the sinuous curve of a river winding through dense jungle. But this was not just any river. In the ink, faded to brown with age, was a name written in an older Quechua dialect, Shunidimpischka. Beneath it, in Latin, the translation, the boiling one. It made no sense. I knew the region it marked, hundreds of miles of lowland rainforest, swamps, and slow brown currents. There was no volcanic activity there, nothing to heat a river. Yet the map was precise in a way that suggested observation, not imagination. Where did this come from? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Father Ignacio's gaze did not leave the parchment. It was found in the satchel of a Jesuit missionary, Brother Andres, who vanished in the jungle in 1782. His companions were never recovered. The satchel was retrieved decades later by a hunter, hanging from the branches of a tree. Inside was this map and nothing else. The fire damage troubled me. You think the satchel burned? Ignacio shook his head slowly. We think the map was taken from the river itself. I laughed, a sharp, nervous sound, but the monk's eyes were dead serious. He told me of the old legends, ones even the Spanish chroniclers recorded with a mix of disdain and unease. A river so hot it could cook a man alive, stretching for miles through the forest, steaming under the sun like the breath of the underworld. Locals said it was the dwelling place of a spirit serpent older than the gods, whose body coiled beneath the earth, whose breath heated the waters until they bubbled like a witch's cauldron. To approach without offering was to die screaming, skin peeling from your bones. As he spoke, I felt the library walls fade away. In my mind, I saw a jungle choked with mist, a brown current rolling with unseen heat and shapes, human, animal, drifting lifeless along the banks. I told myself it was nothing more than folklore. But folklore has a way of staining the truth. What about evidence? I asked. He hesitated, then reached beneath the table and placed before me a small, corked glass vial. Inside, a murky, amber-stained water sloshed sluggishly. Its surface shimmered with something metallic. This was taken by the last man to seek it, Ignacio said. A geologist named Robert Hellings, from your own England. This vial was mailed to his family after he vanished in 1935. The note that came with it was unsigned. Hellings' body was recovered months later, half buried in riverbank mud. The coroner wrote that his internal organs showed signs of thermal trauma inconsistent with exposure to open flame. It was then, in the flicker of that low, dusty vault, that I understood this was not an ordinary academic curiosity. This was a question that had consumed men for centuries, and sometimes eaten them alive. When I returned to my lodging that night, I could not sleep. The rain outside sounded like rushing water, and my dreams swam with images of steam rising from dark waves. I woke with my pillow damp beneath my cheek and the taste of iron in my mouth. Days passed. I left the monastery with the father's reluctant blessing to study the map further. In Lima, I combed archives, chasing footnotes and half-remembered expedition logs. Each thread led me deeper into a tangle of whispers, stories from rubber tappers, missionaries, and oil prospectors who swore they had seen smoke rising from the forest canopy on windless days, or heard a hiss like 1,000 kettles boiling beneath the earth. What haunted me most were the disappearances. Small expeditions that left from river towns and were never heard from again. Diaries ending mid-sentence. Photographs blurred not by motion, but by a kind of heat shimmer warping the frame. And then, in a forgotten drawer of the National Library, I found a letter. It was dated 1912 and addressed to the governor of Loreto province. The writer, an engineer named Cesar Montalvo, described a survey crew sent to chart a tributary in the upper Huallaga Basin. They returned with burns on their legs and torsos, injuries the local doctor could not explain. Montalvo ended the letter with a single line. "The river is alive, senor, and it is angry." By then, my fascination had hardened into something else, a compulsion. Every rational instinct told me to stop. But the boiling river had hooked its current into my mind, pulling me toward it. It was a week later, in a dim cafe near the Plaza Mayor, that my obsession took its final, irreversible turn. The postman found me there, sipping bitter coffee over a stack of notes. He handed me an envelope, thick and sealed with a wax crest I didn't recognize. There was no return address, only my name, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. I broke the seal. Inside was a single piece of cream paper, slightly damp, its edges curling as if from heat. Across it, in dark ink, were 7 words. I saw it and it saw me. The signature was missing, but I didn't need it. I knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver through my bones, that this was from someone who had stood on the banks of Shunitimpishka and lived just long enough to send this warning. And in that moment, I understood something else. The boiling river was not waiting to be discovered. It was waiting for me. The first thing that struck me was how quickly the light disappeared in the Amazon. It was not nightfall, not even dusk, only the thick, greedy embrace of the jungle swallowing the sun whole. The air was a wet shroud, heavy with the smell of rotting leaves, earth, and something faintly metallic. I followed Mateo in single file, our boots sinking into the spongy ground with a slow rhythm, each step matched by the distant, restless chatter of unseen birds and insects. Mateo was tall, wiry, and silent, moving like a man who had learned long ago that the forest listened. He did not speak the river's name. Not once, not even when I asked him directly. The moment I said Shanidimpishka, he froze for the briefest second, eyes flicking to the treetops, as though something unseen had just leaned in to listen. Then he shook his head and muttered in Spanish, "Do not give it your voice here." At first, I thought it superstition, the sort of guarded belief locals sometimes keep for the sake of tradition. But there was nothing playful or theatrical in the way Mateo avoided the syllables. It was reverence tinged with dread. And in the way he spoke of it, not her or him, I felt the strange certainty that the river was neither male nor female but something other, older than those distinctions, older than the tribes themselves. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to thicken, the canopy knitting itself into a living roof. Moisture condensed on every surface, dripping steadily into the soil. Thick vines hung like sleeping serpents. The ground steamed faintly where patches of sunlight broke through, and my mind kept flicking back to the vial of water I'd seen in the monastery, amber and shimmering like it was alive inside. By the second night, I began to understand why Mateo carried no watch. The jungle's time was not measured in hours but in sounds, the shifting tone of the insect chorus, the moment the frogs began their throaty hymns, the sudden, complete silences that fell like a blade. That night, as we huddled by a small, smokeless fire, the silence descended. It was not the kind of stillness that soothes, it was the kind that presses in, filling your ears until you hear your own pulse. Then, from the darkness between the trees, a pale shape drifted. It was faint at first, like heat shimmer, but it thickened as it moved, curling upward like the ghost of smoke. It didn't rise into the air. It glided as if it had purpose, drifting from tree to tree. The fire's light revealed hints of a human form inside it, a suggestion of a face where no face could be. I must have made a sound, because Mateo's hand gripped my wrist with sudden force. "Do not follow them," he whispered. "Do not answer when they speak." And I swear, though I had not heard them before, when he said that, the thing turned toward me. The shimmer pulsed, and then came the faintest whisper, high and layered, as though 10 voices were speaking at once in a language I didn't know, yet felt in my bones. The moment passed. The figure slid away into the green and was gone. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined more of them in the dark, gliding closer, pressing their formless faces to the skin of the tent. By dawn, the world outside was dripping with mist. Mateo moved quietly, packing our gear without a word. His eyes looked shadowed, as if he too had slept little. That day, the forest seemed changed. We moved slower, the air thicker with steam. The insects were quieter. Even the bird song was muted, replaced by an occasional low, almost wet hiss from somewhere far ahead. It was midday when Mateo finally spoke again. His voice was flat, as though the words themselves weighed heavily. "My grandfather," he said without looking at me, "was a boy when he saw the river. He went with his uncle to hunt. They did not return together." I waited, not wanting to break his rhythm. "They found his uncle's bones a month later," he continued. "They were not buried. They were lying on the stones by the riverbank, but shiny like glass. The bones were whole, no teeth marks, no breaks, just cooked, as if he had boiled where he stood." A chill settled in my spine that had nothing to do with temperature. "What about your grandfather?" I asked. "He came back," Mateo said, "but he never walked right again. His legs, the skin was gone in patches. And he never spoke the river's name after that day. Not once. He said if you say it too many times, it will remember your voice, and when you sleep, it will come to listen at your ear." The way he said listen made me picture something huge and wet, its breath scalding against my face. I didn't ask more questions. We walked for hours, and the jungle seemed to lean closer with every step. My mind kept drifting to those steam figures from the night before. Were they memories of the river's victims? Or something older, fragments of whatever god or beast might dwell beneath the water? The air was heavy enough that each breath felt like swallowing a mouthful of lukewarm tea. My clothes clung to me, damp from both sweat and the jungle's breath. That night, we didn't light a fire. Mateo said the light would draw things. We sat in darkness so complete that I could not see my own hands. And then they came again, the pale shapes, drifting silently between the trees. This time, there were more of them. Some slid low across the ground, others floated high in the branches. I closed my eyes, but that made it worse. The whispers grew louder in the dark. I thought I heard my own name once, drawn out and distorted, like it was being spoken underwater. When I opened my eyes again, one of the shapes was close enough that I could make out the faint, burned black outline of a hand within the shimmer. I must have trembled because Mateo's voice hissed, "Don't let it see fear. Fear is an offering." We stayed like that for what felt like hours until the shapes faded back into the mist. Only then did I realize my skin was damp, not from sweat, but from the condensation of the heat around us. By morning, the temperature had risen noticeably. Even the windless air felt like the breath of an open oven. My hair was slick, my skin clammy. The jungle smelled different too, less of green life, more of something mineral, like heated stone. We reached a section where the undergrowth thinned, and for the first time, I thought I saw the faintest glimmer of water through the trees. It wasn't close, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. Mateo stopped abruptly, raising his hand. His face was turned slightly upward, listening. And then I heard it, a hiss, deep and constant, rolling through the forest like a hidden waterfall. But it wasn't the sound of falling water. It was thicker, almost like the sound of a massive kettle, bubbling and straining. As we stood there, the air around us seemed to grow heavier by the second. The temperature was rising, slowly at first, then in palpable waves. Sweat stung my eyes. My breaths came quicker, as if I'd been running. Mateo turned to me, his face grave. "It knows we are here." And somewhere beyond the green, that deep, steady hiss grew louder. By the third day in the jungle, I had begun to notice it, a shift so subtle at first that I mistook it for my own exhaustion. The air was no longer merely warm, it was heavy, thick, as though each breath carried the weight of water you could almost drink. It clung to the inside of my throat and lungs, as if the act of breathing itself had become work. The smell of green life, so vivid when we first entered the forest, was changing too. It was faint at first, then stronger, the scent of heated stone, of wet metal, of something cooked long past tenderness. Mateo said nothing. He only moved faster, his long strides forcing me to push to keep up. But I could see it in his shoulders. The stiffness, the subtle tension of someone moving towards something they would rather walk away from. The map was folded in my pack, but I didn't need it anymore. The coordinates were burned into my mind. And though we were still miles away, I could feel we were on the river's breath. The forest itself seemed to be changing. The towering ceiba and mahogany gave way to thinner, twisted trees with leaves that curled at their edges like paper touched by flame. Some leaves were scorched brown at their tips, yet the trees still clung to life, stubbornly rooted in soil that shimmered faintly in the light. The ground was warm beneath my boots, not the warmth of sun-baked earth, but something rising from within, something deep. It was then I noticed the silence. Not the eerie, sudden quiet we had felt on earlier nights, but a more deliberate absence. The birds were gone. The bright, darting shapes we had glimpsed in the canopy before, tanagers, parrots, macaws, had vanished. Even the air seemed emptier without their cries. The only sound was the slow rustle of leaves and the occasional drip of condensation. I tried to tell myself they were simply elsewhere, drawn to richer feeding grounds. But then I saw it. A parrot feather, brilliant blue and green, lying in the path. It was dry, brittle, as if it had lain too close to an open flame. Mateo stopped suddenly ahead of me, crouching to touch a patch of earth where the plants lay wilted. I knelt beside him, and the heat coming off the ground made my palms sweat in seconds. The stems here were bent as if the plants had tried to turn away from something. Their leaves were alive, but twisted, edges burnt in strange patterns, like curling script. "We are close," he said, but there was no relief in his voice. Only warning. The heat deepened with every step, until it felt like we were walking into the breath of some unseen beast. My hair stuck to my scalp, my shirt clung wet to my skin, and a fine mist beaded on my eyelashes. I could no longer tell if it was sweat or condensation from the air itself. When we paused to drink, I pulled out my compass. The needle spun lazily, turning circles as though drunk. I tapped it, shook it, nothing. Mateo's eyes darkened. It doesn't like being found, he murmured. What do you mean? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The river, he said. It can confuse you, make you lose your way. Some say the heat is its breath. Others say it is the anger beneath the ground, warning you to go back. And yet, neither of us turned back. The path was narrowing now, closing in with ferns and low branches. Every now and then, I would see the shimmer of heat in the air ahead, like the mirage above a summer road. The hours bled together, the sky a patchwork of light and shadow through the canopy. At one point, we passed a fallen tree, its trunk blackened and cracked open, the wood inside brittle as ash. Mateo didn't stop to inspect it. He didn't need to. Whatever had burned it hadn't come from above. The forest floor began to tilt downward, and with it came a change in the air. The warmth became oppressive, pressing down on us like a weight. My head throbbed. Each breath felt hotter than the last, as if the air itself had been boiled. My water bottle was nearly empty, but even the thought of drinking felt strange. My body wanted something cool, something the jungle no longer offered. By late afternoon, the light began to shift toward gold. Mateo stopped and turned sharply to me. "We do not stay here after sunset," he said, his voice like stone. "Why?" I asked. "Because it comes closer in the dark," he replied. "And it does not like strangers." He didn't explain further, but the look in his eyes was enough. I could see, reflected in them, the memory of something he had seen, or perhaps heard, on this path before. We pressed on. My mind drifted between the present and the fragments of history I had gathered, Jesuit maps burned at the edges, diaries that ended in mid-sentence, bones like volcanic glass. All those stories, all those years, and still this place was here, waiting. The first real sign came as the path began to open. A faint hiss reached my ears, distant but steady. It was not like wind or rain, nor like the rush of a waterfall. It was lower, more constant, the sound of something under strain. I realized my hands were trembling. We crested a small rise, and the view ahead was swallowed in mist. Not fog, mist rising from the ground itself, swirling in lazy columns that glowed faintly where the dying light touched them. The air tasted different here, tinged with minerals, almost metallic. My skin prickled, as though every pore sensed the change. I pulled the compass again, though I knew what I'd see. The needle spun in tight circles, as if mocking me. Mateo glanced at it once and then looked away, muttering a prayer under his breath. The hiss grew louder, and with it, the temperature. It was no longer the heat of summer or even the swelter of midday jungle. This was the heat of water at the edge of boiling, the kind that makes the skin ache before it burns. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. The sun was sinking, the shadows lengthening. I felt a strange pull toward the mist, a curiosity so sharp it was almost hunger. Mateo's voice broke through it. "We leave in 5 minutes. If we do not, we may not leave at all." But even as he said it, the air around us shifted. The light was fading fast now, and the mist seemed to take on a faint glow of its own. It wasn't from the sun. This was colder, stranger, a pale illumination that came from the ground itself. And then I saw it. Through a thinning in the mist, far ahead, a shape emerged, wide, rolling, moving with the steady pulse of a living thing. It was not a road, not a clearing. It was water, if water could be called that, a current of steam, thick and restless, stretching beyond the limits of my sight. It rolled as though breathing, the glow beneath it shifting like the slow turn of embers in a dying fire. Under the rising moon, it looked alive. I could not breathe for a moment. The air in my lungs felt too hot, my skin damp with something more than sweat. Mateo's hand gripped my arm hard enough to hurt. "That," he said, his voice a whisper swallowed by the hiss, "is as close as we get tonight." And somewhere beneath that moving skin of steam, something shifted. The moonlight touched it, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, I thought I saw it looking back. The mist was so thick now that every step felt like stepping into a dream that might not let you wake. My skin was slick, my clothes clung to me, and each breath was hotter than the last. Somewhere ahead, Beyond the shifting veil of steam, I could hear it, the sound that no river should make. It was not the rush of water or the chatter of rapids. It was slower, deeper, and impossibly steady. A sound you could feel in your ribs. A sound like breathing. Matteo didn't have to tell me we were close. My body already knew. Every instinct, every buried animal reflex in me was screaming to turn back, to return to cooler air and the green embrace of the forest. But the pull of the map, of the stories, of the impossible truth waiting beyond the mist, was stronger. We came down a slope of blackened stones slick with condensation. The trees here were sparse, their leaves curled and scorched at the edges. The ground was warm underfoot, as though something deep below was smoldering. And then, without warning, the trees fell away entirely, and we were standing on the banks of Shunitimpishka. The first sight of it stopped me cold. The river was wide, far wider than I had imagined, and it moved with the slow, deliberate roll of something that had no need to hurry. Its surface bubbled constantly, small eruptions breaking the skin of the water, each sending a curl of steam into the air. The color was a deep, opaque brown, but where the bubbles broke, there was a flash of something darker beneath. And that sound, that deep, guttural exhale, rose from the surface with each roll of current, as if the river itself was drawing breath. The heat hit me in a wave. My skin prickled instantly, my lips felt dry, and my eyes stung from the vapor. Matteo stopped a few paces behind me, as though crossing an invisible line would offend something unseen. I knelt cautiously at the bank, careful not to let my skin touch the water. The stones here were slick and black, some cracked into sharp edges. Without thinking, I reached for a fallen branch and tossed it into the current. It floated for barely a second before it began to writhe. The bark peeled away in strips, curling and blackening, until the branch itself sank, leaving only a ripple and the hiss of steam. I drew back, my heart hammering. The legends had been right. This was no ordinary hot spring or heated pool. The river was alive with heat, not in pockets or isolated stretches, but along its entire width. "It will cook a fish in seconds," Matteo said quietly. "A man in minutes." My mind fought to find the rational explanation. Volcanic activity. Yes, that was the only thing that could produce such heat. But as I thought it, I remembered the maps I'd studied. The nearest volcano lay hundreds of miles away, across ranges and valleys and entire worlds of terrain. There was no conduit, no geothermal link that could explain this. I dipped the tip of my knife into the water. The steel hissed immediately, and when I pulled it out, the blade was spotted and dulled, as if it had been scoured by acid. I wiped it on my trousers, but the smell clung, metallic, sharp, and faintly sweet in the way blood can be. Matteo stood with his arms folded, watching the current as if expecting it to rise up at any moment. "The elders say it is the breath of Yakamama," he said. "The mother of waters. They say she sleeps beneath the earth, and her breath keeps the river alive. She warms it for her children, but kills those who do not belong." I glanced at him. "Do you believe that?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air shimmered above the surface, twisting the light into strange shapes. Now and then, I thought I saw movement beneath, not the flash of fish, but something larger, slower, and darker. A shape that didn't fight the current but moved with it, as though the river flowed around it instead of over it. I tried to focus on my work, to take readings, to note the temperature of the air, the color of the stones, the direction of the current, but my eyes kept drifting back to those glimpses beneath the surface. The heat was oppressive. My lungs felt raw, and the moisture in the air clung to me until even my hair dripped. I could taste the minerals on my lips. Matteo stayed back, pacing a small area, never letting his boots touch the stones right at the water's edge. I crouched lower, peering into a patch where the bubbles rose more slowly. For a moment, I could almost convince myself it was safe. The water there was smooth, its surface broken only by the occasional pop of a trapped gas bubble. I leaned it, and then I saw it. Something shifted in the depths. Not a shadow, not the trick of a ripple, but a shape, vast, deliberate, and moving slowly upward. My breath caught in my throat. The color was hard to place in the shifting light, dark brown or black, smooth, without scales, yet not like any mammal I had seen. The surface above it trembled, steam curling in unusual patterns as if the heat itself were bending to make way. The sound of the river's breathing deepened, rolling up from the depths until I felt it in my bones. Mateo's voice came low and sharp. "Step it. Now." I didn't move at first. I couldn't. The thing beneath the water paused, almost directly below me, and though I couldn't see eyes, I felt watched. The hair on my arms rose. My body understood before my mind could catch up. Whatever this was, it was aware of me. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I stepped back onto the higher stones. The shape remained where it was for another heartbeat, and then it sank, disappearing into the opaque current as though it had never been there at all. The river's breath resumed its slower, steadier rhythm. Mateo came to stand beside me, his eyes fixed on the spot. "It knows you now," he said. The words should have sounded absurd, but they didn't. Not here. Not in this place where the air itself seemed alive. We stood in silence as the sky above dimmed. The mist glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the river rolled on, its breathing a slow promise. Somewhere beneath that surface, the dark shape moved again. The night after I first stood on the banks of Shunidempishka was one of the longest of my life. The river's breath never stopped, that slow, guttural exhale rising from the depths, rolling through the mist, seeping into every thought. Even when my eyes closed, the sound was still there, echoing through my bones like the heartbeat of something vast. I drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, each one ending with the feeling of being pulled downward, into water too hot to survive. When dawn came, it was not with the gentle light of a jungle morning, but with a pale, filtered glow through steam. Mateo was already awake, crouched by the water's edge. His posture was wrong, too still, too deliberate, and the sight of him sent a shiver up my spine. I approached slowly, the stones still warm from the night before. That's when I saw it. On the blackened rocks near the shoreline lay a capybara, the largest rodent in the world. Here a massive creature, its fur slicked flat, its body still steaming in the cool morning air. But this one had not been killed by predator's teeth or hunter's arrow. Its skin had split in several places, the flesh beneath pale and boiled, as if it had been dropped whole into a cauldron. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle. Only the heat of the river could have done this. I stopped in my tracks. What happened to it? Mateo didn't look up. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The river feeds." Feeds? The word sounded wrong, human, too small for what I was looking at. He finally turned to meet my gaze. Everything in the jungle belongs to something. The trees belong to the sun. The animals belong to the forest. The river, it takes what it wants. It feeds on life, and sometimes life brings itself to the water. The idea lodged in my mind, heavy and unsettling. The capybara had likely come here to drink, just as countless creatures had before it. But in this place, drinking was a death sentence. And yet, here it was, perfectly presented on the shore, as though left intentionally, a gift or perhaps an offering claimed. We didn't touch it. Mateo said it was bad luck to disturb what the river kept. He muttered something under his breath as we moved along the shoreline, a prayer or warning, I couldn't tell. The bank here was uneven, shifting between stretches of smooth, scorched stone and patches of earth where twisted roots clawed toward the water. Steam rose in thin columns from every crack and crevice. The air shimmered, distorting the shapes ahead until they almost looked like figures waiting in the mist. It was then that I saw them, the stones. At first I thought they were just part of the bank, scattered and blackened like the rest. But as I drew closer, their shapes became more deliberate, upright slabs, worn by centuries, their surfaces etched with deep, curling lines. I knelt to inspect one, brushing away a layer of damp moss. The carvings were unmistakable, figures of men and women kneeling before something vast and coiled. Steam curled up from its body in the engraving, rising over the kneeling forms like a shroud. The serpent. The lines were simple, but there was no mistaking the sense of scale. The people in the carving were tiny beside it, their heads bowed low, their hands outstretched as if offering something. In some panels, they held bowls or animal shapes. In others, they offered what looked like flowers or fruit. In one, more chilling than the rest, a man offered another man. I moved from stone to stone, tracing the stories in the glyphs. Here was a time when the river's breath was gentle, its serpent coiled and sleeping. Here was a time when it writhed through the water, steam rising in angry spirals, the people scattering. And here was the river's return to calm, with offerings laid out along the shore, animals, plants, and people alike. Matteo stood a few paces back, watching me. His face was unreadable. "You've seen these before," I said. He nodded slowly. "Not here, but in other places. Old places. They are warnings, not stories. The people before us knew you do not take from this water without giving something back. And sometimes it decides what the gift will be." The words sank into me like stones. My eyes drifted back to the capybara. We continued along the river's curve, the heat growing heavier with every step. The mist thickened, curling around us until the jungle was nothing more than a shadow at our backs. My thoughts were muddled, my head swimming from the oppressive air. I could almost hear whispers in the hiss of the river, not words I knew, but syllables formed of breath and heat. Matteo stopped suddenly. Ahead, the bank narrowed into a slender spit of rock that reached toward the opposite shore. He turned sharply to me. "This is where we stop." "Why?" He looked across the river, his eyes narrowing. "Beyond that side, it is not our land. It belongs to the serpent entirely. No one who crosses without being called comes back." I followed his gaze. The opposite bank was barely visible through the steam, but I could make out darker shapes along it. More stones, perhaps, or something else entirely. "We've come this far," I said, my voice low. "Don't you want to know?" And then I froze. From across the river, faint at first but unmistakable, came the sound of a scream. It was human, high, desperate, cut with the ragged edges of pain. It rose above the hiss of the water, echoing through the steam. I turned sharply toward Matteo, but his face had gone pale. "Someone's over there!" I shouted. Matteo shook his head violently. "No, no one is over there. Not anymore." The scream came again, this time longer, twisting into something that almost sounded like a word before cutting off abruptly. My skin prickled with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "I have to see," I said, stepping toward the narrow spit of rock. Matteo's hand shot out, gripping my arm like iron. "If you cross, I will not follow. And if you hear it again, you must not answer." But my eyes were already locked on the shifting mist across the water, where the shapes on the shore seemed to move. Somewhere in that unseen place, someone, or something, was calling. The river's breath deepened, and beneath its hiss, I thought I heard the faintest splash. Something was moving in the water between us. The scream still rang in my head long after it had faded into the hiss of the river. It was a sound no imagination could conjure, raw, human, stripped of all dignity, a voice in its final moments. Matteo's grip on my arm was iron, but my gaze kept drifting across the boiling expanse, toward the drifting shapes in the mist on the far shore. He warned me again, his voice low but sharp, each word weighted with something close to fear. "If you cross, I will not follow. That side belongs to the serpent entirely." But there are moments when reason is an ember and curiosity is a wildfire. I could no more turn away from that sound than I could stop breathing. The log bridge lay a few paces upstream, slick with condensation, no more than the width of my own shoulders. It arched over the narrowest point in the river, where the current rolled slow but deep. Even from here, the heat radiating off that gap struck me like the opening of an oven door. I stepped toward it. Matteo's hand tightened once more, and for a heartbeat I thought he might drag me back. But then he let go, his eyes heavy with something that might have been resignation. "If you go," he said quietly, "remember, don't speak your name." I nodded, though I didn't understand, and placed my first foot on the bridge. The log shifted under my weight, the bark slick and warm. No, not warm. My boots absorbed it instantly, the heat seeping through the soles, curling into my skin. A few steps more and it felt like standing barefoot on metal left too long in the sun. My calves tightened, sweat sprang fresh on my forehead, and my lungs clenched at the air thick with vapor. By the time I reached the middle, the heat was alive on my skin, a biting sting that threatened blisters. I kept my eyes forward, not daring to look down into the roiling breath of the water beneath me. When my boots touched the opposite bank, the ground was not cool relief but another wave of searing warmth. My heart thudded in my chest. Behind me, Matteo was a dark figure half lost in the mist, unmoving, his face unreadable. I pressed on. The air here was different, not just hotter, but heavier, as though each step carried me deeper into the chest of some slumbering beast. The jungle's voice was gone. No birds, no insects, only the hiss of hidden fissures where steam curled upward in lazy columns. The ground itself was scarred and cracked, small rivulets of hot water running between the stones. And then I saw the village. It emerged from the mist in fragments, the slanted outline of a roof, the curve of a wall, the skeletal remains of what had once been a path. The huts were small, built from dark wood, their frames blackened and warped. Some leaned at strange angles, half swallowed by the earth. Others had collapsed entirely, their timbers rotting into the steaming soil. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on a surface that was neither stone nor soil but something brittle, like old bone. Steam hissed from cracks between the huts, the air around them shimmering with heat. The settlement felt wrong, not merely abandoned, but left in a single, sudden moment, as though the people here had all risen at once and walked into the mist, never to return. My fingers trailed along the edge of a hut. The wood was dry, the texture strange. It crumbled slightly under my touch, and when I drew my hand back, the tips of my fingers were blackened, ash. A movement caught my eye. To my left, half hidden in the steam, a circle of shapes stood on a flat stretch of ground. I moved toward them, my steps slow, every sense alert. They were human skeletons. The bones were black, not from decay but from heat, their surfaces smooth and glossy like volcanic glass. They sat cross-legged, facing inward, forming a perfect ring. And the skulls, each one bore markings carved deep into the bone, lines that twisted and looped in a pattern I recognized instantly from the stones along the opposite shore. Feels the serpent again, etched into their very remains, as though even in death they were marked as belonging to it. I knelt beside one, my breath trembling. The carvings were intricate, too precise to be the work of an unsteady hand. Some of the lines followed the natural curve of the skull, others intersected to form shapes like eyes, like the suggestion of a coiled body. My fingertips hovered over them but did not touch. This was not a massacre. This was ritual. I stepped back, the weight of it settling in my chest. These people had not died in chaos. They had been placed here, arranged with care, their final positions chosen. Whether they had come willingly or not, I couldn't tell. The mist thickened, curling through the empty doorways of the huts. I had the sudden, sharp impression that the village was not empty at all, that eyes were watching from the shadowed interiors, from the cracks in the walls, from the spaces between the steam. A whisper slid through the air. It was so faint I almost thought it was the hiss of a fisher, but then it came again, curling into the shape of a sound. Not a word I knew, not at first, but something shaped like my name. My skin went cold despite the heat. I turned sharply, scanning the mist. The whisper came again, closer now, the syllables drawn out, low and deliberate. The steam ahead shifted, and a shadow formed within it, tall, human-shaped at first glance, but the edges wrong, too fluid, the shoulders too wide. It loomed in the swirling vapor, its form dark against the pale glow of the mist. I could not see its face, but I felt its gaze. The bones around me seemed to hum, the heat pressing in from all sides. My breath caught in my throat. I took one step back, and the shadow moved forward, the whisper curling again through the air, now not just saying my name but almost breathing it. Somewhere far behind me, the steady exhale of the river grew louder, as if it too had taken notice. The shadow loomed closer, the mist around it swirling faster, the air thickening until I could taste the minerals, the salt, the heat. And then it spoke again, not my name this time, but something else, low and impossible, in a language that made my bones ache to hear. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The shadow took another step, and I knew, without knowing how, that it was not the village that was forgotten. It was me. The shadow in the mist did not vanish. It lingered there, silent after speaking its impossible words, its form wavering like a mirage. My pulse thudded against my temples. Every muscle in my body told me to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the scorched ground. And then, from behind the shadow, or perhaps from within it, a smaller figure began to emerge. She stepped into the clearing slowly, as if the air itself resisted her movement. She was old, her body slight but held upright with a stubborn strength. Her skin was a map of scars, pale, ridged patches like melted wax, stretched over bone and sinew. Steam burns. But her eyes were black and sharp as obsidian, the kind that cut through heat and mist alike. She stopped a few paces from me, the shadow behind her dissipating like a receding tide. "You are far from where you should be," she said, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of many years. I swallowed, forcing words through the dry heat in my throat. "Who are you?" Her cracked lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I am Yara, the last of the river's healers." Her title struck me like a chord from some old song I didn't remember learning. "The healer here? In this place where the water killed in minutes? You heal with this?" I gestured toward the steam curling from the fissures, toward the hiss of the river beyond the mist. Her eyes narrowed. "Once, long before you, before him." She tilted her chin in the direction of the opposite bank, where Matteo still waited unseen in the mist, before all outsiders. The heat was a gift then. It burned sickness from the blood, drove fever from the bones. We brought the weak here, bathed them in the edges of the water, let the river's breath fill their lungs. They left whole again. I tried to picture it, people kneeling in the steam, the water's edge alive with voices, not screams but prayers. The idea was almost beautiful, and yet the weight of the village's charred bones pressed on my thoughts. "What happened?" I asked. Her gaze hardened. "What always happens. Outsiders came. They saw the power and thought it could be theirs. They dug into the earth, built channels to steal the heat, the water. They wanted to carry it away in their ships, to sell it to their kings and generals. They knew nothing of balance." Her voice lowered, but there was an edge in it like the crack of stone. "The river gave warnings. They did not listen." I felt the air around us shift, a faint tremor in the ground beneath my boots. "And the people?" Yara's gaze turned toward the circle of skeletons I had seen earlier. Some resisted. Others thought they could take without paying the price. The river taught them the truth. It always does. Her eyes locked on mine then, and her voice sharpened. "Those who take without offering are not boiled by the water." She stepped closer, the heat radiating from her skin in waves. "They are taken by what sleeps beneath." My stomach tightened. "The serpent," I said, though it came out as a whisper. She nodded once, slow and deliberate. "It does not wake for fish. It does not wake for animals. It wakes for greed. And when it wakes, it feeds." The air grew heavier still, pressing against my chest. I glanced toward the river, though I could barely see it through the mist. The hiss seemed deeper now, a tone so low it vibrated in my ribs. "You're saying it's alive," I managed. Her head tilted slightly, those black eyes unwavering. "Alive? Life is too small a word. It is here as the mountain is here, as the ocean is here. It is not alive, it is." A drop of sweat traced down my temple. The ground gave a faint shudder beneath us, subtle enough that I might have dismissed it if her expression hadn't shifted, the slightest flicker of concern. I thought of the bones, the carvings of scales, the offerings. "Why are you still here? If it's so dangerous—" "I stay," she interrupted, "because without someone to keep the balance, there will be no jungle, no people, no river. Only steam and bones." Her hand rose then, surprisingly steady for its age, and she pointed toward my arm. I glanced down and saw, faint beneath the sheen of sweat, the mark I had gotten when the steam first brushed me at the water's edge, a pale patch, almost like a burn, shaped in a faint curve. "It has touched you already," Yara said. "It knows your heat, your blood. You must decide whether you are guest or offering." Before I could respond, the ground trembled again, harder this time. The stones beneath my feet shifted, and from the direction of the river came a sound that was no longer just a hiss. It was deeper, rolling, the breath of something waking. Yara's head snapped toward the sound. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but every syllable was sharp as a blade. "You asked what happened to those before you? Now you will see." The tremor grew into a steady vibration, the ground humming underfoot. Steam burst from a fissure near us with a hiss so violent it made me stumble back. The roar of the river swelled, no longer the slow exhale I had grown used to, but a rising growl, layered and complex, as if many voices were speaking beneath it. Yara's eyes were on the mist now, her face lit by the faint, shifting glow from the water. "It knows," she said softly. "It feels the heat of our bodies, the weight of our steps. And it is hungry." I could see nothing yet, only the thickening steam, the way it coiled and twisted as though stirred from below. But the sound filled the air like a living thing, wrapping around my thoughts, my breath, my very heartbeat. The ground gave a sharp jolt, and I heard, or felt, a deep, slow movement in the water, a shift of mass too large to comprehend. Yara didn't look at me when she spoke next. "When it wakes, you must not run. If you run, you are prey. If you stand—" She left the sentence unfinished, her eyes narrowing as the roar deepened into something like a growl. The mist ahead began to churn, as though something vast was pushing upward from beneath the boiling current. And then the ground shook again, harder. Somewhere beneath the water, something was coming. The roar of the river had deepened into something more than sound. It was vibration, pressure, a low thrum that gripped the inside of my bones and refused to let go. I stood with Yara at the edge of Shanidampishka, the mist curling around us like the breath of some sleeping god. I had not moved since the last tremor. I wasn't sure I even could. Her voice broke the silence, the same way a blade cuts through cloth. "You wish to see what lies beneath?" The question was not an invitation. It was a measure. "Yes," I heard myself say, though every sane part of me screamed that this was not what I wanted. "Not really." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for hesitation. Finding none, she turned away, disappearing into the warped shadow of one of the surviving huts. When she returned, she carried something wrapped in oilskin, its surface stained with age. She set it on the scorched ground and unwrapped it carefully, as though she feared even now it might vanish in her hands. It was a suit, if you could call it that. The fabric was thick, dark, and strangely supple, almost like leather but lighter, smoother. The seams were stitched with some pale fiber that gleamed faintly in the steam. It covered the body fully, from neck to foot, with gloves and boots sewn as one. The helmet was shaped like a hood, the face a single pane of thick, clouded glass framed with metal that looked nothing like steel. "This was given to my grandmother by the old ones," Yara said. "Woven from the skins of river beasts that no longer live, stitched with the sinew of those who did not return. It will keep you from boiling for a time." The way she said it made the words sound like a bargain, not protection. The air was almost too hot to breathe even before I began pulling the suit on. The inside smelled faintly of earth and something mineral, like stones pulled from the deep sea. It fit close against my skin, sealing me in. The glass before my eyes was dim, the world beyond tinted amber. Yara stood close, her burned face unreadable. "When you are beneath, do not follow the lights. They are not for you. Do not touch the bones unless you are ready to offer something in return. And if you see the eye, you must not look away." The last warning coiled in my mind as she led me to the edge. Steam rolled over the rocks, so thick I could barely see the current below. "When you breathe in there, breathe slow," she said. "It will feel like breathing fire, but do not rush it. The river listens to breath." I lowered myself into the water. The suit took the worst of the heat, but even so, I could feel it, the press of warmth, seeping through the strange material, wrapping around me like a living thing. It clung to my skin, heavy and unyielding. The surface broke over my head, and the world above was gone. Beneath the steam, the river was not darkness but a shifting amber glow, thick and heavy, carrying particles that caught the light like dust motes in a sunbeam. The water moved sluggishly here, each current a slow, deliberate push. I descended carefully, my boots finding purchase on rock that pulsed with warmth. Then I saw them dozens of them, dotting the riverbed like the mouths of sleeping creatures, each one ringed with pale stone. From them poured clouds of shimmering heat, rising in twisting columns. Some vents glowed faintly, like embers buried in ash. Others flickered with a dull light, deep and steady. As I moved, shapes began to emerge from the haze. Massive forms, pale and jagged, jutting from the riverbed. At first I thought they were stone, worn smooth by centuries of current. But as I drew nearer, I saw the truth. They were bones. Not the delicate frames of fish or even the sturdy skeletons of land animals, but colossal structures, rib-like arcs taller than a house, spines coiling through the silt in patterns that suggested both movement and burial. Some were whole, curving away into the gloom. Others were shattered, fragments scattered like the remains of a war no one remembered. I reached out, almost, to brush my gloved fingers over one, but Yara's warning rang in my mind. Do not touch unless you are ready to offer something in return. I drifted on. The heat pressed harder the deeper I went, but my eyes kept being drawn to the strange light that pulsed between the bones. It was not like the steady glow of the vents. This was rhythmic, deliberate, as though it had a heartbeat. I followed it before I could think better of it. The vent ahead was unlike the others, larger, its rim covered in a pale crust that looked almost like scales. The light from within it shifted, dimming and flaring, and the water around it trembled faintly with each pulse. I hovered before it, the suit heavy on my shoulders, my breath loud in my ears. Then the pulse quickened. The crust along the rim began to move. Not crumble, move. A fissure split the center, widening slowly, and from it emerged something so wrong, so ancient, that my mind refused for a heartbeat to name it. An eye. Lidless, the size of a man's torso, its surface a milky gold laced with veins that glowed faintly from within. There was no pupil, not in the human sense, only a darker center that seemed to deepen the longer I stared into it. The light I had followed was coming from it, not the vent. It did not blink. It did not need to. But I felt it seeing me in a way that was not sight, as if it were reading the shape of my heat, the rhythm of my breath, the very weight of my presence in its water. Every part of me wanted to turn, to flee upward toward the fading gleam of daylight above. But Yara's voice echoed again. If you see the eye, you must not look away. So I held its gaze. The heat surged, a pulse that rippled through the water and rattled the bones around us. My lungs burned, my heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I didn't move. The darker center of the eye widened slightly, not in expression, but as if it were opening into something deeper. And then it moved. Not slowly, not with the lazy drift of something in water. It lunged, covering the distance between us in a heartbeat, the water exploding in turbulence as the world became heat and light and the soundless scream of pressure closing in from all sides. It was upon me before I could even breathe. The world was nothing but heat, pressure, and the crushing awareness that something vast and ancient had closed the space between us in less than a heartbeat. In that instant beneath the river, I understood Yara's warnings were not superstition. They were survival codes carved from centuries of loss. The eye filled my vision. It wasn't just looking at me, it was inside me, moving through memory and thought like smoke through cracks. The heat radiating from it seeped into my bones, making my teeth ache and my blood feel like molten metal. And then it withdrew. Not far. Just enough that I could see more than the eye. The shape around it resolved, and it was not something that belonged in any age of man. The serpent's head was massive, elongated, and covered in a skin that was not truly opaque. The water shimmered through it in pale, distorted ribbons, giving it a strange, ghost-like translucence. Beneath that ghost skin, I glimpsed muscles that coiled and uncoiled like molten cables. Heat radiated from it in visible waves, distorting everything around it. Its body stretched back into the depths, thicker than the trunks of the ceiba trees we'd passed days before, tapering only slightly as it vanished into the haze below. Steam rose constantly from its form, curling toward the surface in endless tendrils. And it was moving upward. The current began to pull at me, and I realized what was happening. The serpent was rising. I kicked hard, fighting toward the lighter glow above. My limbs felt sluggish, as though the water itself resisted me, clinging to me like the weight of 1,000 hands. The serpent's ascent shook the riverbed, vents releasing sudden gouts of heat that swirled in my path. Then my head broke the surface, and the world erupted. The river boiled harder than before, the mist exploding upward as the serpent breached. It rose in a slow, uncoiling arc, its translucent body glistening in the moonlight. The heat that rolled off it hit like a wall, forcing me to squint against the sudden glare of steam. Matteo was on the far bank, his eyes wide, his entire body frozen. Beside him, Yara stood like a stone, her gaze locked on the creature, lips moving in some low chant I couldn't hear over the roar. The serpent's head hovered above the water, massive enough to cast its own shadow in the mist. Its skin caught the moonlight in strange, opal sheens, revealing faint patterns beneath, curves and spirals like the carvings on the stones, but alive, shifting subtly with every movement of its muscles. "It is Yakamama," Yara said, her voice steady but loud enough to carry across the boiling water. "Mother of waters, guardian of this place. She does not come for the curious. She comes for the greedy." The serpent's head turned slightly, the eyes sweeping across the bank and landing on Matteo. I saw something flash across his face then, not awe, not terror, but something sharper, desire. He moved suddenly, fumbling in his pack and pulling out a small black device. "A camera." "No!" Yara's voice cracked through the air like a whip, but Matteo was already raising the lens, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he thought he could capture. "The world will see this," he called out, almost laughing. "Proof. They'll believe me." The serpent's head lowered slightly, steam thickening around it. "You take without offering," Yara said, her voice like iron. "She will not forgive." Matteo didn't listen. His finger tightened on the button. The shutter clicked once, twice. The serpent moved, but not toward me. It struck without warning, the water surging forward in a violent wall. Matteo barely had time to drop the camera before something invisible, fast, and unstoppable wrapped around him. His scream tore through the mist, high and raw, echoing across the boiling expanse. I lunged forward instinctively, the heat scorching my face through the suit's visor. But there was no reaching him. His body was yanked toward the water as though by a hook driven into his spine. He clawed at the rocks, steam hissing where his fingers touched, skin sloughing away in white patches. His scream broke, the sound warping into something strangled as the water closed over him. For one heartbeat, I saw him beneath the surface, his eyes wide, mouth open in a cloud of bubbles, and then something massive and coiling blotted him out. The scream didn't return, only the hiss, only the bubbles. The serpent's head rose again, its body curling in slow arcs. Steam poured from its skin, wrapping it in its own weather, until it seemed less a creature and more a moving piece of the river itself. The eyes swept across to me again, holding me in that alien gaze. Yara's voice cut through the boiling silence. "You came back with nothing. You gave nothing. That is why you still breathe." My chest heaved inside the suit, each breath dragging in the thick, mineral-laced air. The serpent began to sink, the steam closing over it in great, coiling ribbons. The heat did not fade. It lingered, as if the water still remembered the shape of its passing. On the far bank, Matteo's camera lay on the stones, half melted, its glass shattered. The bubbles where he had vanished slowed and stopped. When I woke, the jungle was quiet. Not the living quiet of dawn, when birds hold their breath before the light, but a heavy, stifled stillness, as if the world itself had withdrawn a step, leaving me in a hollow between moments. The first thing I noticed was the smell, damp earth, mineral steam, and something faintly sweet, like scorched honey. The second was the heat. It wasn't the oppressive, blanket-thick heat of the riverbank. This was more focused, more personal, a warmth that seemed to come from inside me. I sat up slowly, the unfamiliar stiffness of the heat-resistant suit pulling against my skin. The memory of the serpent, of Mateo's final scream, of the bubbles swallowing him, rushed in all at once, heavy enough to make me sway. But my thoughts froze the instant my eyes fell on my arm. On the inside of my forearm, just below the elbow, was a mark. It was perfectly circular, the edges a raw, angry red that deepened to a pale burn in the center. And within that center, the skin was darker, patterned faintly in a shape I had seen before, not etched with a blade, but branded into the flesh itself. It was the serpent's eye. I touched it without thinking. The heat was immediate and sharp, a sting that made my fingertips recoil. But beneath the sting was something else, a rhythm. It pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. From the shadows beyond the steam, Yara emerged. She moved without haste, her scarred face impassive, as though she had been waiting for this moment. Her gaze went to my arm instantly. "It has marked you," she said. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat felt thick, my voice strange in my own ears. "Marked me? For what?" Her eyes held mine for a long moment before she answered. "To carry its warning, to bear its memory beyond this place. You are chosen now, not as a hunter, not as an offering, but as a voice." The words were heavy, too heavy to carry in the thin air between us. "A warning? For who?" "For the ones who will come," she said, kneeling beside me. "They always come, with greed in their hearts and emptiness in their hands. The river has spared you so that others may hear. But you must not mistake this for mercy." Her fingers brushed the edge of the burn. I flinched at the contact, though her touch was surprisingly gentle. "This mark is not ink or scar. It is alive. It will grow as you near water. It will burn when the serpent wakes. It will never fade." I wanted to ask what would happen if I ignored it, if I simply left the jungle and never spoke of what I had seen. But I already knew the answer, though I could not have said why. The river did not grant escape, it granted time. The pulsing in the mark seemed to grow stronger the longer she looked at it. I pulled my arm back, but the sensation followed, spreading up through my bicep, into my chest. My heartbeat faltered, then matched the rhythm of the burn. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air felt hotter now, thick with steam even away from the water's edge. A bead of sweat slid down my temple, only it wasn't sweat. It was warm, almost scalding. Yara's expression didn't change. "It begins," she said. I shook my head. "What begins?" "The boiling," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You carry the river inside you now. Its heat is in your blood." The words lodged in me like stones. I pressed a hand to my chest. My skin was warm to the touch, but beneath it, there was a deeper heat, not feverish, not sick, but purposeful. It moved with each beat of my heart, slow and steady, like the breath of something vast and patient. I thought of Mateo then, of how quickly the river had taken him, and the way Yara had said those who take without offering. I had not taken anything, not in the way he had, but the mark on my arm told me that the river had taken something from me instead. The pulse quickened. It wasn't just in my arm now. It was in my throat, in my temples, in the tips of my fingers. The warmth spread like an incoming tide, filling every hollow. My breaths came shallow, the air scraping in my lungs. Yara placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip steady. "Do not fight it. Fighting will only quicken the heat. Let it move through you." Her voice was calm, but beneath it I sensed something else, not fear, but recognition. She had seen this before, perhaps many times. I closed my eyes, trying to do as she said. At first there was only the heat, heavy and consuming. But then I felt something within it, a thread of sound. Faint, distant, like the echo of a chant carried over water. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was low, mournful, and ancient. My eyes opened. "What is that?" "The river's memory," Yara said. "It speaks to you now. Listen well, because its voice will follow you all your days." The chant rose and fell with the rhythm of the pulse in my arm, each note a ripple of warmth through my body. For a moment, it was almost soothing. But then the pitch changed, sharp and urgent, and the heat in my veins flared. I gasped. My skin was burning now, truly burning, though there was no flame. Every pore seemed to push heat outward, the air around me shimmering faintly. I could see it in Yara's eyes, not surprise, but a grim acknowledgement. "You are closer to it than most," she said. "Closer than is safe." The pulsing in my arm became erratic, and the mark itself seemed to darken, the edges rising slightly as though the skin were swelling. I pressed my palm against it, but the contact only made it worse. It was like holding my hand over a vent of escaping steam. A terrible thought struck me then, and I didn't want to voice it, but the words came anyway. If I keep this, if it keeps growing, will it kill me? Yara didn't answer right away. She looked toward the river instead, where the mist swirled and shifted with unseen movement. When she did speak, her tone was slow and deliberate. "The river does not kill without reason, but if you carry its mark and ignore its call, it will take you back." The idea of being taken back, of sinking into that heat, that breath, that I sent a cold shiver through the fire in my veins. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. The heat wasn't just in my blood now, it was in my muscles, my bones. Every movement felt slow, deliberate, as though the river itself were moving me from within. The chant in my head grew louder. I could almost hear words in it now, though they were in no language I knew. The sounds curled and twisted in ways that felt like steam moving through narrow channels. The mark throbbed violently, and I realized something horrifying. The skin around it was damp. Not with sweat, but with condensation. My body was heating the air enough to make the moisture condense on me. I looked at Yara. "It's getting worse." Her gaze was steady, almost sad. "You are beginning to boil." The words hung between us like a sentence passed. I thought of the capybara on the shore, its flesh split and pale, of the bones in the village, smooth and black like volcanic glass. My stomach clenched. I pressed my hand to the mark again, but the heat there was too much, as if it were not part of me anymore but something separate, something alive and watching. The chant in my head swelled until it drowned out the world. The mist thickened, the air shimmered, and the beat in my arm matched the rhythm of the river's breath. I understood then, whatever this was, it had only begun. The mark had begun to dictate my heartbeat. It wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to the river. I could feel its rhythm even in my dreams, slow and deliberate at first, then quickening without warning, as though something deep beneath the water had stirred and found me in the dark. Yara stood over me at dawn, her shadow sharp in the thin mist. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she listened, not to me, but to the river. Her head tilted slightly, and I could see her counting the rhythm of the steam bursts, the low sighs of heat rising from fissures. Finally, she looked at me and said, "You have only days now. When the beat becomes one with the boiling, you will not belong to the world above anymore." The words didn't need explaining. I knew. My body knew. The heat in my blood was no longer a warning. It was a claim. The serpent had marked me, and now the river was drawing me back like a tide. I told her I had to leave, that I couldn't die here, not like the others. She nodded, but her eyes were heavy with something like pity. "Then we must move quickly," she said. "But you cannot walk alone. The steam knows the way back to itself. I will guide you, and you must follow my voice, no matter what you hear." She began chanting before we even left the village ruins. It wasn't loud, not meant to be. The sound was low and even, almost lost in the hiss of the fissures, but it anchored me. Every time my steps faltered or the heat in my chest swelled too high, the chant steadied me, pulling me forward. The first steps away from the river were harder than I'd expected. I thought distance would weaken its hold, but it was the opposite. With every foot I put between us, something in me pulled back, an invisible cord tightening in my chest. My breath came shorter, and a dull ache began to spread from the mark up into my shoulder. Yar noticed but didn't slow. "It will try to keep you," she said. "It does not take kindly to losing what it has claimed." The jungle had changed since I'd crossed into this side. The mist hung heavier, and the trees leaned inward as though conspiring to block the way. Their trunks were blackened in patches, leaves curled like old parchment, and the ground was warm underfoot, not in spots, but everywhere, as if the whole forest carried the fever of the river. Hours passed. The mark pulsed harder now, sending waves of heat into my ribs. I stumbled more than once, the ground seeming to tilt beneath me. Twice I thought I heard the serpents breathing behind us, low and deep, but each time Yara's chant pulled me forward before I could look back. By the time the sun began to dip, the heat in my body had changed. It was no longer a steady burn. It was surging, cresting in waves that made my vision shimmer. I tried to tell Yara, but the words came out slurred, heavy, as though the air itself was pushing against my mouth. We stopped to rest near a cluster of stones carved with the same serpent spirals I'd seen before. Yara pressed her hand briefly to my chest, frowning. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. "It is calling you already. We must reach the crossing before night." The crossing? I knew she meant the narrow log bridge, the same one I'd used to disobey her and step into the serpent's land. The thought of reaching it filled me with both relief and dread. We started again, her chant quickening, the rhythm sharper now, more urgent. I followed her steps, trying not to think about the burn in my veins. The jungle seemed to resist us. Branches hung lower, forcing us to duck and twist. Roots caught my boots, and once I felt the ground give way beneath me, a sudden gush of steam hissing upward from the split. And then, in the fading light, I saw him. At first it was only a shape on the path ahead, a human silhouette half lost in mist. I thought it must be a trick of the heat, some phantom called up by my boiling blood. But as we drew closer, the figure turned. It was Matteo. He stood in the middle of the path, facing us. His clothes were the same as when I'd last seen him, before the serpent had dragged him under, but something was horribly wrong. His skin was translucent, stretched tight over bone and sinew, and beneath it, his veins glowed faintly, carrying light the way rivers carry current. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. They were not the eyes of the man I'd known, but deep pools of heat, the irises edged with faint, shifting steam. Yara stopped dead, her chant cutting off. The silence around us deepened, the forest holding its breath. Matteo took a step forward. The movement was wrong, too fluid, too certain, as if the forest itself cleared his path. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, and the sound went through me like a blade of ice. "It doesn't let us leave." The mark on my arm flared white-hot, the pulse inside it hammering against my bones. My knees buckled. I reached for Yara, but she was staring at Matteo with an expression I couldn't read, part recognition, part dread. He stepped closer still, and the mist swirled tighter around him, as though the serpent's breath moved with him. "You can try to run," he said softly, "but it will follow. It always follows." I wanted to ask him what he meant, what he had become, but the heat in my blood surged so violently that the world tilted, the trees swaying like shadows underwater. The last thing I saw before darkness swam up to meet me was the faint, impossible glow of Matteo's veins, and the way the mist behind him began to coil like something alive. The day it arrived, London was sunk deep in one of those thick winter fogs that dull the edges of sound and make even familiar streets feel like a dream half forgotten. The library's windows were beaded with moisture, the pale light outside pressing through like a hand against frosted glass. Professor Elias Wren sat alone at a long oak table. The air around him scented faintly with dust, ink, and old leather bindings. He was marking a paper on colonial cartography when the postman's knock broke the silence. The package was small and heavy for its size, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. Only his name, written in a hand he didn't know. The letters were slanted, sharp, as if written in haste, yet oddly deliberate in their strokes. Wren was not a man easily startled, but something about the weight in his hands made him hesitate. He turned it over. The paper was damp, not from the fog outside, but as though it had been wrapped in steam. The faint smell of minerals lingered on it, mingled with something sharper, metallic. He took his penknife and slit the paper open. Inside was a battered, leather-bound journal, its cover scuffed, its corners frayed. When he lifted it from the wrapping, a faint warmth radiated into his palms, subtle but unmistakable. The smell of sulfur rose from its pages. The name on the inside cover stopped him cold. Claire Alden. Wren had met her once, years ago, at an academic conference in Oxford. She'd been brilliant, intense, too restless for the comfort of tenure or the slow turning of academic life. She had spoken of maps not as static relics but as living things, keys to worlds that still breathed if one only knew where to look. And now, here was her journal, appearing without warning, wrapped in damp paper on a London winter's day. He turned the first page. The ink was still crisp, the lines dense, her handwriting neat but quick. The early entries were dated months earlier, beginning with her arrival in Peru. Ren read in silence, the library's stillness closing around him as her words pulled him far from the fog-bound city. She wrote of the monastery, the burned map, the old monk who had warned her of the boiling river. She wrote of Mateo, of the jungle nights when steam drifted like ghosts between the trees, of whispers that spoke in languages older than any she knew. She wrote of the river itself, Shunimpishka, its breath and heat, the serpent carved into ancient stones, the offerings left along the shore. Ren read of the capybara's boiled body, of the forbidden crossing, of the village swallowed in steam fissures. He read of Yara, the healer whose burned skin hid obsidian eyes, and of the serpent beneath the water whose eye opened without warning, vast and lidless. He read until the quiet of the library no longer felt like silence but like something holding its breath. Her words grew more erratic the deeper into the journal he went. Ink blotted, margins crowded with notes in a different hand, her own, but slanted, as if written in a hurry or with unsteady fingers. The descriptions turned feverish, bones like volcanic glass, a heat that pulsed from within her own skin, the mark on her arm taking on a rhythm of its own. She spoke of feeling the serpent in her blood, of hearing chants that rose and fell with the beat of her heart. Ren paused when he reached the first mention of Mateo after his disappearance. Her account was jagged, almost disbelieving. She claimed to have seen him on the path out of the serpent's land, alive but changed, his skin translucent, veins glowing faintly as though filled with liquid fire. His words were brief, but she'd written them as though they were burned into her mind. It doesn't let us leave. The final dated entry came days later. Her hand was still firm then, though the words seemed weighed down. She described the last crossing, Yara's chants leading her through a jungle that bent inward as though to keep her. She wrote of the pull in her chest, the sense of the river dragging her back, each step away from it an act of defiance. And then there were no more dates. The last pages were filled with fragments, half-sentences, sketches of coiling shapes, diagrams of the eye. Ink smeared as though water or sweat had fallen across the page, but the smears were warm to the touch. Ren found himself brushing his fingers over them without thinking, only to draw back at the faint sting of heat. He turned to the very last page. The writing there was different, larger, heavier, the ink pooling in places where the pen had paused. The words staggered across the paper, a final effort spent on the act of leaving them at all. It is rising. Beneath the sentence was a smear of ink, the kind that happens when a hand drags across wet words. Only this smear was not black but tinged faintly red, as if something more than ink had stained the page. Ren's pulse had quickened without his noticing. He glanced around the empty library, the fog pressing pale and thick against the windows. He should have closed the journal, locked it away, brought it to someone who could explain it. But he didn't. He turned the page back and stared again at the final words. The air in the room was changing. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, the stillness gave way to something denser, heavier. A faint curl of moisture drifted upward from the seam between two floorboards near the far wall. Ren blinked, thinking it a trick of the cold air meeting the warmth of the library's fire. But the curl thickened, rising steadily, coiling in slow spirals. Another followed, then another, until the space between the shelves was threaded with pale vapor. The smell reached him then, faint but sharp, the unmistakable bite of minerals and heat. It was the smell of the journal, of its pages. The smell of the river Claire had described in such relentless detail. The warmth in the room began to grow. Not the even heat of a fire in winter, but something uneven, pulsing, as though it had a source that moved and breathed. Ren's gaze dropped to the floorboards, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, he thought he saw a thin line of water seeping between them. It shimmered faintly as though lit from below. The curls of steam thickened. They did not drift aimlessly. They coiled together, gathering above the spot where the boards had darkened with damp. And in the library's stillness, he thought he heard it. Not loud, not even fully formed, but there in the bones of the building, a low, guttural exhale. The kind of sound a river might make if it were breathing. And so, the steam still rises. Somewhere, beyond the maps and the reach of roads, the river coils in its bed like an ancient thought that never died. Its breath still curls into the night, carrying whispers in a language no living tongue remembers. The bones still lie where the heat blackened them, and the eye still waits beneath the current. Perhaps, even now, someone will find this story and think it no more than a legend told by firelight. Perhaps they will smile, close their door against the cold, and forget. But the river remembers. It always remembers. If you felt the heat of its breath in these words, if you heard the hiss in the quiet between your heartbeats, then you have already stepped onto its banks. And if you dare to follow further, into the jungles where the past still walks and the old gods still hunger, then you will find more waiting for you here. Like this tale, leave your voice in the comments so it joins the echoes. Share it with those who would travel beyond the edges of the known. And if you wish to keep walking deeper into these shadows, into mysteries older than history itself, then follow the path, subscribe, and the next story will find you.